Good evening, afternoon, night, morning, whatever you want to call this thing, whatever you find your time to watch or listen to this. It is me, Omar, back from a week hiatus in the field for hardware with my friend, my good friend Jackson. And I gotta say, thank you, Brock. I gotta say, I was thinking about it today. Brock Vieira, our friend Brock of Midnight Sports Today of Team NBS Media. He's like our PJ Walker. Anytime one of us is out, he just steps in and just performs admirably. PJ Walker being my favorite backup quarterback in the league. But yeah, like he's our PJ Walker. So I hope Brock sees this. We'll probably, clip this and tag him. But shout out to Brock, our PJ Walker, this podcast.
Yeah, Brock did a phenomenal job. He's already such a busy guy, so I appreciate him. I struggle to find the time sometimes to do all the prep and the recording for this. When I was asking him, "Hey, where can we find your stuff?" He named pretty much all 32 teams of the National Football League that he covers for various media outlets, and then his college football podcast that he has, and there's other like, oh my, like, man, he is a busy dude. He's dedicated, and he's as not. There's not a topic that he talks about that he's not knowledgeable and doesn't have an informed opinion about. I mean, he is a smart dude. Love listening to him, love listening to his stuff. So yeah, shout out to Brock. Thanks so much I learned a few things from it. Hopefully he did too, but man, Brock's the best, man. So I thank you again. Yes, let's clip this because he was awesome for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what a week it was. I know I got to catch some games in my off time, during the field exercise, but a good week of college football. I mean, just some exciting games. I know I caught a little bit of Duke versus Florida State. That was after the first quarter, me watching the first quarter of a Michigan State, just because I love the Big Ten Saturday night theme song. But just a great week. So I mean, Jackson, I mean, you have some players. We both have some players of the week. So I say we start with those, and we have a spirited discussion with one or two of our players of the week on offense or defense.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So, I will start off with my offensive player of the week. I'm going to go with Ollie Gordon, the running back from Oklahoma State. 29 rushes for 282 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a huge win versus West Virginia. Watching him, probably my favorite trait of his is just his spatial awareness. He's not a go hard, straight line, run you over runner. He's extremely methodical, not in the sense of Le'Veon Bell, where he's like patient, walks up to the line of scrimmage. Like he goes hard, but each step that he takes is the optimal one. Like it really only comes from film studies and active eyes that he really has. Gordon, just his vision and everything is superb. So every year, and he's been consistent all year. He's either had 120 yards or at least 1 touchdown in 6 of his 7 games. So he's been a performer all year long. I want to point out it's rare that a running back is the one to kind of bail you out of a shootout. But like they did against West Virginia, but he's been doing this for a while. Back in high school, he actually ran for 6 touchdowns and a 49-45 win to advance to his playoff quarterfinals. So I promise I'm not an Oklahoma State fan. I know I went with the Cowboy as my defensive player of the week last week, but man, I recognize the talent that Mike Gundy has recruited and developed out there. So Ollie Gordon, phenomenal performance, and put West Virginia kind of in their place last week.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I was ready to give up on Oklahoma State a few weeks ago after they lost 33-7 to South Alabama, probably the most embarrassing loss for a Big 12 team in a long time. I
You
mean,
could argue
yeah,
most embarrassing loss of the year too. I know the Virginia loss was bad. I know there have been a couple others, but man, bro, like that,
yeah,
you could. There was not a more
you could, yeah.
unexpected double-digit loss, in my opinion.
Exactly. So I mean, I wrote them off, but they are sitting at a nice 5-2, which makes that game a head scratcher. They look primed to go to one of the Big 12's better bowls. I have them slated to go to the Alamo Bowl in my bowl projections against USC of all teams. But I mean, Mike Gundy's just been able to recruit throughout his time just amazing running back talent. You look at Chuba Hubbard ran for 2,000 yards in 2019. Then you go back further to when I was a kid. You got a guy like Kendall Hunter, former Niners back who did well in a backup role for the 49ers and Keith Tosin. So just great running back talent. I'll
How
allow him.
many times do you think, in speaking of Mike Gundy recruiting really good running backs, how many times do you think he mentions the obvious?
I think
Barry
he does.
Sanders.
I think he does it. I think he does it
You
more
think
than
he love showing Barry Sanders highlights?
Yeah, I think he does it way more than San Diego State does. Because San Diego State, I don't know how they have been able to recruit great running back talent, lately. Which that is a discussion for another time. So I'm gonna go with my offensive player of the week. I got Matthew Sluka for Holy Cross, and yes, it was in a losing effort. Yes, the passing stats were not there, but this is a gentleman. This is a man. Not even the Zach Wilson, the Seven Hills anymore. Like this is like what we're seeing is like this is like Pat White level. This is the Lamar Jackson of the Seven Hills. I'll call him the Lamar Jackson because 330 rushing yards, the most by a Division I quarterback ever, even more than Khalil Tate when Khalil Tate had that great run in 2017. In a losing effort though, because Holy Cross lost to Lafayette, who Lafayette, I don't want to say I told you so, everyone, but I had Lafayette ranked before everyone in the poll. I'm just saying that, and I said that they were a contender for an at-large bid in my polls. I will say that. So I will say I know ball. But anyway, Lafayette beat Holy Cross at Fitton Field, and it looks like Holy Cross run. I mean, the 4 straight titles was an amazing run in the Patriot League. Looks like it's over as Holy Cross sits at 4-3 with one conference loss, and really they need Lafayette to lose 2 games. And the Patriot League has I think 7 game conference season. I think it's a 6 game conference season. There's 7 teams, so good luck getting Lafayette losing twice to the rest of the Patriot League, which the Patriot League lacks depth. But I mean, Matthew Sluka, in my opinion. So I saw that I can see him playing a Malik Cunningham type role on a team where a team wants to have him around and just find ways to get him the ball because I know the Patriots lined up Malik Cunningham at quarterback for a couple snaps this week. They played him at receiver. So I can see a similar situation with Matthew Sluka because this man he is one of the most gifted runners in Holy Cross history, in the history of the Patriot League, and in college football right now.
Okay. All right. So we had this debate like off air too, but we'll have this
Yes.
debate during this again. So okay. I have just a fundamental moral objection to a quarterback who went 7 for 21, no matter how many rushing yards he has, getting offensive player of the week, much less in a losing effort. So did Sluka have a great performance? You know what? I even say that. It was a great performance. Was he on his best behavior, so to speak, throwing the ball? No, he was not. And that's your main objective. I guess no, that's a lie. Your main objective as a quarterback is to score points, which that he did. But after
Sluka
that,
can't play
you
defense,
need to be able
Jackson's.
to distribute the ball. You need to be able to distribute the ball. When do you need to be good at passing the ball? When do you need a strong passing game? When is it most needed? When you're behind. When you're behind. Holy Cross came out at one point in the game early in the third quarter down 24-7, right? So they needed to pass the ball. Now, what got them back into the game was a 70-yard Sluka rushing touchdown,
Yes.
which accounted for, a pretty good chunk of those rushing yards. So I'm not saying he didn't have a great performance. I'm just saying that, at best, Holy Cross didn't play complimentary football and the defense didn't really help them out, allowing multiple like 40-plus yard touchdowns. I think they allowed like 3 40-plus yard touchdowns. So Holy Cross at best didn't play complimentary football. And at worst, you had a quarterback who was kind of like Penn State has been against Ohio State. They got competitive, but they couldn't get over the edge. They couldn't get over the hump.
So
So
I see the points you're making, but I feel like you're reflecting a lot of football fans' fixation on the passing game instead of looking at the fact that a guy ran for 330 yards, a quarterback ran for over 10 yards a carry. It's like I just don't know what more you want him to do because he ran for 10 yards per carry. It's not like he had 40 carries for 300. Only had 28 carries, So, and the conditions were wet. The ball was wet,
good. It
and
was good. It was good as a quarterback. I'm not saying wins aren't necessarily always a quarterback stat, and I'm not saying this one was. This loss isn't on him, but it was not enough. They didn't win the game by Matt Sluka running the ball.
Okay, that's a
So
good point. Well, you're
yeah.
really gonna enjoy this
So
discussion later on for
so
our
yeah.
Heisman
Well,
talk.
we can
You're gonna enjoy
continue
that.
this. I don't think we're gonna resolve this.
I don't think so
But yeah,
because
yeah. I
I'm
don't
just
think we
saying,
can.
I'm saying that Matthew Sluka will find himself on a roster. A team will figure out that he is dangerous with the ball in his hands in the NFL. Maybe he's not as polished as a passer, but I know a team will find a use for him.
Listen, one of the greatest quarterback performances that you could argue was I believe Anthony Richardson last year against LSU. Didn't work out. Not raving about it. Wasn't player of the week. Could have deserved to win that game, but he didn't. So
Anthony Richardson and Player of the Week are two words that do not belong in the same sentence. So
that is
with
that
with,
is
with that with
man
that I will move on.
man
Um
that is
that I'll
all
move
right.
on.
We'll just move on. You know what? We've
Yeah.
both touched sore spots for each other. We'll just move on. So I'll start off with my defensive player of the week, Alec Mock, the linebacker from Air Force. In just 7 pass rush snaps against Navy, he had a quarterback hit and 2 quarterback hurries, another 5 tackles and 1 forced fumble, and another 2 defensive stops, which is a analytic that kind of considers a tackle that warrants a failure on the offensive side. So Alec Mock with a heck of a game, a win versus Air Force that could have been I had them winning. I wasn't really worried about it, but I could have seen it being a sneaky loss. So Alec Mock with a heck of a performance against Navy. So
Yeah, I think people will focus on the offense, how the triple option rolled again for Air Force, but that Air Force defense is probably one of the greatest defensive performances I've seen in my life because yeah, Navy got those yards at the end and they got the touchdown, the late touchdown, but entering the fourth quarter, Navy only had I think 11 yards total offense. Like I have never seen an offense, I guess, in FCS and versus FBS matchups, like, yes, that happens. But I don't think I've ever seen a defense have a more dominating performance through 3 quarters. But of course, like they let up. But I mean, Air Force has had a great defense for the past few years, and I mean they are well equipped the rest of the way. So we'll see if they run the table because I think they're the story of the year for in college football. I mean, even against Sam Houston, they allowed 80 yards of offense to the Bearcats. So just an impressive defense all around, and Alex Mock leads that. And they had some sweet unis too. The Doolittle Raid uniforms are great, great
yeah,
uniforms.
those were good. I will say those were good.
Yeah, Air Force always brings the heat with the Legacy series. Not even gonna lie to you, I've been tempted to buy a couple, especially the Red Tails one. I'm an Army fan, but the Red Tails one was nice just for everything it stood for. I still have held off because I cannot buy that. That would be like you, Jackson, buying a Georgia or a Florida State jersey. I just
Yeah,
can't
no,
do it.
never gonna happen. I don't care what they
So
were. So
I can't
yeah,
do it.
never
I
gonna
mean,
happen.
you
I
wanted
do
to
remember during Army Air Force Week a year or so ago, I wore my Red Tails jersey on the show. So
see
and that
exactly.
that
So I'm
annoyed
tempted.
you. And then here you are saying you want to buy one. So
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm tempted.
sold
I'm
mine
not gonna
on
lie.
eBay. Jokes on you.
But yeah, like yeah, Tuskegee Airmen, it's a good thing to honor. I'll go with my player of the week. I got linebacker Alex Harriet, who had 16 tackles for the Presbyterian Blue Hose in a game against Marist. And Presbyterian seems to be producing just great linebackers because I remember back in the pandemic season when we first started covering the FCS extensively, Colby Campbell had 25 tackles. I think that set the record until a year later when Ryan Greenhagen had like 27 tackles against Nebraska, but just great linebacker play from the Blue Hose all around. I mean, and stopping Marist or holding Marist on only 185 yards was no small task as Marist is, having a very good year in the Pioneer Football League. I mean, and we could end up having a 3-way tie in the PFL that, I guess there's like might have to go down to the fourth or fifth tiebreaker, but that's another discussion for another time. Going on to our HBCU players of the league, I'll start with mine. I'm going to go with Jarvian Howard for Alcorn State. Sorry, not Alcorn,
Oh man.
Alcorn State out
Ah,
of Norman, Mississippi. My bad. I know. We'll have to edit that out. Alcorn State, Jarvian Howard. And Jarvian Howard is an under the radar back for sure. I mean, I feel like people have forgotten about Alcorn State since, Jackson State took over the SWAC in 2021 and 2022. but Alcorn State has been playing some nice football. Not bad football. I'll say that. But I mean, Jarvian Howard had 14 carries for 155 yards. Last year, he had over 200 carries, averaged over 20 carries per game, and had 1,200 yards. They beat Arkansas Pine Bluff easily, 31-7, to go on to 4-3. Even though the SWAC East looks like it belongs to FAMU, but Jarvian Howard, I mean, this is a guy that I definitely think could be a workhorse on a team, and he can show a team some stuff in the preseason and end up on a roster. Even show some stuff in the National Spring Football League now, if you will, because the Orlando Guardians, your favorite team, the great Jah Maine, the man Martin was their starting running back and had some great moments for the Guardians this year or this past season. So I mean, I'm excited for Jarvian Howard. Me, ever the running back guy. Glad to see him perform at such an efficient clip, but just feed this man. This is the guy that you can feed the ball, 20 plus carries, per game.
Yeah, any of your XFL takes are usually your second worst takes on Twitter. I will
I'm
say your
sorry.
first
Which
being,
league is having four teams contracted? Yeah, that's not the USFL. It's getting four teams contracted. Sorry, Jackson.
hey, since when do you care about big money football? So that's like you saying, hey, which conference is getting, dissolved? The Pac-12? Yeah, or whatever example you want to use. So man, it's like you pulling for the SEC.
The
This
Rock
thing.
spent
So
$60 million on jerseys with his name only, and they couldn't sell any because they were $200, and that's why they're merging with the
they were
USFL.
great. They were great jerseys. And the PB&J Terramana tequila, French toast, and and all the concessions and all that. Man, the XFL was perfect. Your worst take on Twitter being that Draft Day isn't an elite sports movie. It is. I
I've
would
never
argue the
seen it, to
best
be honest
one.
with you. I've never
You're
seen it.
missing out. You're missing out. So, probably the only movie I watch at least once a year. So, but yeah, man, I'll move on from your terrible Twitter takes. But man, yeah, I can't even remember the linebacker's name, unfortunately. So, um, got distracted by your nonsense. I'm gonna go with Terrence Holland, the linebacker from Howard, as my HBCU player of the week. And I do want to, Terrence Holland led the charge. I do want to give an honorable mention to all of Howard's defense on that ESPNU appearance. They actually had 7 different players each have TFLs, which is insane for a come from behind win versus Norfolk State. For Terrence Holland specifically, he had 9 solo tackles, 4 assists. One of those TFLs did belong to him, as well as half a sack. So shout out to Terrence, and then shout out to Aaron Bickerton, the Howard punter. 4 punts for 124 yards, including a 52-yarder and 2 that went inside the 20. So this was a close game where special teams mattered, especially in a come from behind win. And he made the most of it. So shout out to Aaron Bickerton as well. So Omar, I want to get your thoughts just on the Howard game in general, and also if you noticed anything from Terrence when you were watching the game.
Yeah, so I unfortunately that was not one of the games I was able to watch. Even though Howard, it was great that they got the ESPNU spot. 25,000 viewers tuned into that game. That's more than the Charlotte SMU game, which I'm sorry, that is the benchmark I'm using to judge every FCS game on ESPNU from now on. If you draw more than Charlotte SMU on September 23rd of this year, then you're doing just fine. You're doing gravy. But honestly, I think the MEAC looks more open than you think, because I know both of us were singing the praises of North Carolina Central, but on Thursday night, like Morgan State actually had Davius Richard like in a hole. They held him pretty well, and that game was a low scoring affair. That's only in the end did North Carolina Central pull away. I forget what the final score was. I want to say it was like 17 to 10. I think Morgan State scored like a late touchdown to make things interesting, but the offense, and that's just been a sticking point for Morgan State this year. Their offense, where they get in these low scoring affairs, and the defense holds their end of the bargain, but the offense just struggles. I'm trying to find the score of this game, but I think the MEAC is wide open. Well, not wide open, but I do think Howard can make some noise. Like Howard, if not this year, then next year when Davis Richard graduates, then next year the MEAC looks like it could be Howard's. And plus, who's to say that Howard won't get Power 5 talent Power Five talent for the transfer portal because this is a program that has a deal with Jordan. They offer a great education. Larry Scott is a great coach. So I wouldn't be surprised if they got some good Power Five talent out of the portal. But that's just, I guess, to answer your question. I think the MEAC will come down to Howard versus North Carolina Central. So if not South Carolina State, because it's Buddy Pugh's last year,
Yeah,
which that's one of my games to watch. As we'll talk about later on. But I'm excited because it's a 5 game season. It's like no one cares for like for I guess for the context of North Carolina Central, no one cares that North Carolina Central beat a bunch of CAA teams. It just comes down
yeah.
to, I mean, the playoff committee will care if like they lose one conference game, then they're definitely an at-large candidate for sure. I think they'll definitely get an at-large bid. But yeah, no one in the MEAC cares if you beat all these CAA teams. It just matters what you do in those 5 conference games.
In what you said about SC State, at least since I've been following HBCU football, no one likes wreaking havoc on the grand scheme of HBCU football more than South Carolina State, it seems. There are lots of people that watch it a lot more than me, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems to be, man, you can't really ever quite count them out completely. So, um,
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, we'll see for sure. I know that race continues. I like that the MEAC has been able to squeeze in more ESPNU appearances too, and not the tape delay one because they do have the tape delay games sometimes that are aired on ESPN Plus or ESPN3, like the Howard Hampton game earlier this year when Hampton came back from I think like 3 touchdowns down. But like that was a live game that was at noon. People cared, obviously. It was 25,000 tuned in with Ohio State, Penn State happening at the same time, which is year in, year out, the biggest, like probably the second biggest game in the Big Ten, and a top 5 game in the college football playoff race. So it's just great to see as a HBCU football fan. So going on to the crux of our show, hardware, and talk a little about the Heisman race. So I want to start off with some like you told me beforehand. So you mentioned Heisman betting odds, and you mentioned Jaden Daniels being number 3. Of course, Michael Penix is number 1. Number 2 surprised me because naturally I was like, oh, Bo Nix has to be the number 2 betting favorite. But it's JJ McCarthy. And I'll be the first to say, so I'm a purist. I like parity, but at the same time, I like when traditional programs like Michigan and Notre Dame do well because I think it's good for the sport, I think it's good, it's good tradition wise. Sorry, I just had a notification come across my screen, but McCarthy, I like watching JJ McCarthy a lot. One of my favorite quarterbacks to watch. But just looking at his stats, averaging just above 200 pass yards a game. And I want to reintroduce the Stetson Bennett effect, which is something that we talked about last year when Stetson Bennett ended up being a Heisman finalist. And I think JJ McCarthy should be the second, I guess I won't say victim, but second person, listed under the Stetson Bennett effect because I look at these games for Michigan and it's like I feel like Michigan could do good with any quarterback in the Heisman race right now. Like because their defense is so amazing and the skill position talent, like they have 2 of the best running backs in the country, and those guys are splitting carries in Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum. Not to mention the great receiving core that they have, the great defense. So I love JJ McCarthy, love watching him play, but I'm feeling another Stetson Bennett 2.0 situation here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go as far to say, like, you could before it was Stetson Bennett, it was Mac Jones, right? Like a quarterback, surrounded by a fairly elite team, whether they have the signs or not. Um, Sorry, I had to make a joke at some point. But anyways, yeah, JJ McCarthy, good quarterback. There's a reason why you see lots of quarterbacks succeed in the NFL, in my opinion, that are from non like power schools, right? Like there's a reason that you don't see too many Alabama quarterbacks working out great, although Jalen Hurts and Tua are kind of proving me wrong on that. But you get what I mean, historically at least. There's a reason why the Ben Roethlisbergers and guys like that come from smaller schools end up working out because they're not necessarily surrounded by the talent. They do have to rely on themselves more than anyone. So that is a broad generalization that does not ring true for every sample from that. But I will say, it's very easy to mistake a team's success for a quarterback's success because, frankly, quarterbacks are talked about a disproportionate amount of time. It's the most important position in sports, and yet we still somehow talk about it too much. So it really goes to show that it's not, wins aren't a quarterback stat. Sometimes losses are. But wins are not a quarterback stat, and being surrounded by the right team certainly helps. Certainly helps you out. So, Mike Penix, being second, I think is a harsh reaction to the slugfest that was Arizona State. Now, was that Mike Penix's worst performance of the year? Undoubtedly, by far. Hopefully, he doesn't do worse in any other game, because then maybe we should have second thoughts about him potentially winning Heisman. But he has the best quarterback performance out of anyone this year. I think by a pretty good bit. In the Oregon game, obviously, definitely the best resume win. And I think it's a little bit of a harsh reaction, at least in the betting odds are meant to appeal to the public, right? It's not necessarily the most accurate. It's meant for the casual fan that may be watching. It's surprising to me, at least, that after all this going on with Michigan, after Penix's performance just not even 2 weeks ago, that he already had bumped down to number 2. So that's my opinion, at least. If I had a ballot, it'd be Penix, and I don't know who I would put in that second one. Obviously, Bo Nix would be higher up the list than he is. I do want to talk one thing. When does the door open for a non-quarterback to win the Heisman? Right? It's when there's not a clear first quarterback, in my opinion. Now, you could argue that Devonta Smith won it over, the clear number 1 Kyle Trask a couple years ago, and some stuff like that. The clear
Come on,
statistics,
Jackson.
but
Come on, Jackson.
I'm just saying he was clearly
Come on. You
statistically
couldn't say that with a straight face, Jackson. Come on.
and on film the best quarterback. So I don't know. Did you watch the
That's why
all
he's starting the Buccaneers right now, right? The clear cut
Did
number.
did
That's why he's
did
starting for the
you
Buccaneers, right?
Since when is NFL snap shares like relevant to Heisman talk, Omar? My gosh.
No,
Um,
Jackson. What I see, I'm just keeping you honest, Jackson. I'm keeping you honest.
hey, I'm just saying, clear number 1 quarterback, but I digress. When does the door
Really?
open?
Okay.
It's
Okay,
when there's
Jackson.
not necessarily a clear number 1 quarterback, because for the most part, this is a quarterback award. I'm saying, if Penix has another performance like that again, if one of two things happens to McCarthy, if he starts to have something happen like it did with Penix, or something more is made off of all of this sign stealing stuff, if Jaden Daniels has 3 losses, if Florida State ends up being their usual Florida State selves and doesn't finish out the season strongly, if Dylan Gabriel looks good but not great, if Bo Nix continues to be Bo Nix, where sometimes it's great, sometimes it's okay, and Oregon does have the season they won, I'm saying Marvin Harrison Jr. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I went through all the quarterbacks that are ahead of him right now. Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't not look like the best player in college football right now. So I'll leave it
Okay,
at
I
that.
will say this. I mean, you make a great point about there not being a clear cut one, but I think we forget I think the last great Heisman race that we've had in recent memory was 2021, right? Where people don't realize it, but Bryce Young was a game-ending drive against Auburn away from not winning the Heisman. He doesn't take Alabama, I think it was like 98 or 99 yards down the field to send the game to overtime, then he's not winning the Heisman. Kenny Pickett's winning the Heisman. And even then, I'd say that Kenny Pickett was not the definitive best quarterback in the country. Kenny Pickett just had great stats, and he took Pitt to levels that they had not seen in years. And even then, we remember that after Kenneth Walker in the last weekend of October against Michigan, he was the Heisman frontrunner. And it took Michigan State's horrible pass defense had to have CJ Stroud throw for 1,000,000 yards and a bunch of touchdowns against Michigan State for Kenneth Walker to be a non-factor in that game, with pushed out of the Heisman. So I don't think it's as much as there not being a clear cut like number 1 quarterback. I think you mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr., who's having a great year, but he still only has 42 catches. And I mean, 3 catches against Notre Dame. That I don't think that's as great a performance, really. I mean, in one of the more marquee games, maybe against Ohio, sorry, maybe against Michigan. I feel like if a receiver is going to win the Heisman, there's two things that they have to have: a lot of catches and a lot of touchdowns. I don't think you can be a deep threat guy, which Marvin Harrison is a great deep threat, 18 yards a catch, but you have to be a high volume guy, I think, to win the Heisman at receiver. Because Desmond Howard, I think, had 18 passing or receiving touchdowns in 91, along with his returning exploits. Devontae Smith had over 100 catches, 600 yards, and returned a couple punts, including and returned a few punts, including one for a touchdown. So high volume guys. With that being said, um, well, which I think that's a great segue to the position talk because I think we should talk about the fair catch heard around the world with Cooper DeJean for Iowa. And this moment, man, for me, I didn't realize. Funny story from this weekend, right? I'm like watching this as I'm picking up food for my unit for during our exercise, and I'm like watching it on my phone while I'm waiting for our pallet to be loaded. And I closed my Peacock after I saw that Iowa had returned the touchdown. I tweeted out, I'm like, Cooper DeJean needs to be a Heisman finalist, only to find out, I think 2 hours later, that they found out that they called it a fake fair catch, and I was just devastated. I'm like, I should have paid attention more. I should have like not closed right away after they scored because I thought the game was over. There's no way Iowa was gonna allow a touchdown. But that being said, if Cooper DeJean returns that touchdown, Jackson, do you think he is a legitimate Heisman candidate just because of how bad Iowa's offense is and how because this wasn't his first game winning punt return. He returned a punt for a touchdown against Michigan State to win that game as the go ahead touchdown. So I think Cooper DeJean would have had as good an argument as any player in the country for a Heisman had he returned that punt for a touchdown.
Okay, so I'm gonna walk through this all too logically, right? If Iowa wins that game with however they win it, doesn't matter, punt return for a touchdown, whatnot. What is the likely path that they take to the postseason, playing in the Big Ten championship? Right, you're thought of like as on paper, definitely not, but on paper, an equal to the opposing division champion, right? Who can be the opposing division champion this year? One of those teams, Michigan, right? You said Iowa just are that he had a punt return for a touchdown to win the game against Michigan State. What did Michigan just do against Michigan State?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't think like you should need a punt return to beat Michigan State, in my opinion. And Heisman winners typically don't come from teams that can't beat a team like Michigan State with ease. So I'll put it to you that way. I think that he should be definitely talked about for special teams player of the year. I think that would be like or whatever. I'm blanking on the award name for that, but
Johnny the
man,
Jet Rogers Award.
absolutely, definitely should be a front runner, finalist, whatnot, for that award. But for Heisman, unfortunately, no.
Yeah, I mean, I see your point, but it's like again, like the scenario exist. We're in a world of hypotheticals right now. Where Iowa could have hypothetically gone 11-1 and hypothetically beat Michigan in the Big Ten title game, right? Crazier things have happened. Like we just saw Virginia beat North Carolina. Like I don't think anyone saw that coming. I mean, just last week, people were saying, "Will UVA go winless this year?" Well, not last week. Sorry, I guess before they played William and Mary, people were saying, "Will UVA go winless?" So crazy things have happened. So want to throw that out as a thought experiment. That's what podcasts are. All podcasts are thought experiments. Especially like ours, where we talk about award scenarios. Which a thought experiment for you, Jackson. I know you have a certain disdain for the service academies, as you have mentioned various times throughout our show over the years in your picking against service academies, and I want to bring an interesting argument to the table. You
I don't okay, whoa, hold on a minute. I do not pick against, I do not pick against service academies. Now, will I occasionally pick against Army to razz you? Absolutely.
I'm not
But
phased by it. I'm not
I
phased by it.
I I rarely have to razz you because more often than not, when I pick against them, it's because they're playing the better football team. So Boston College, you gave me some words
UConn
about
against Army in
Boston College.
2021. You picked Miami of Ohio to beat us in 2021, and they lost. Talking about Brett Gabbert because you talked about your boy
You
Blaine
have
Gabbert.
you have a good memory for
I
remembering that.
do, Jackson. I do.
All
We
right,
can do this, Jackson.
never
So
never mind. I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, you're right.
exactly,
I
exactly.
lost.
So
Yeah, I was trying to weasel my way out of this. It didn't work. So yeah, you're
So
right. I
that
did.
being said, going back to I guess the Service Academy topic, Air Force I think is the best story of the season, and it's like I hate to say it as an Army fan, but this is a lost year anyway. It's like Army's not going anywhere at this point. I mean, especially after the last couple weeks, we've been outscored 81-0 the past couple weeks, haven't scored a touchdown in 2 games. It's like I'm a kid again. I told my mom, I'm like, I think the old days are back, and I kind of wish I didn't take those Armed Forces Bowl appearances for granted. But that being said, Air Force is 8-0 right now. I mean, they are on a roll. They look like the front runner for the New Year's Six. Of course, they'll have to beat Wyoming again. Um, but sorry, I just got a text from my friend Bobby though, about Diego Pavia, one of my favorite quarterbacks. Is he's watching? I think the Aggies are playing Louisiana Tech right now as we speak. A little bit of cute CUSA Tuesday action, but Zac Larrier. I think we should talk about Zac Larrier in the Heisman race because here's my thing, Jackson. So, who votes on these awards? Writers. Writers naturally are looking for the best stories, right? And they should generate the best stories and the best points of discussion for the country and for college football fans. If that's the case, why is a Heisman race so boring year in and year out? Why is it always the best quarterback on the best team? Why can't we have actual stories, feel good stories in the Heisman race, right? So looking at Zac Larrier, of course, last week, so Air Force fooled everyone. Air Force said that Zac Larrier, the starting quarterback, was going to be out for a while, and I'm like, oh man, what a shame. Like, I mean, Air Force could really like lose some momentum here. And who trots out to start the game? Zac Larrier. That call that military operations at its finest, military deception at its finest. But that being said, like Zac Larrier this year, I mean, he hasn't had an amazing year. He hasn't had an Eric Crouch type year because Eric Crouch is the gold standard for option quarterbacks. I think he had 1,500 passing yards, over 1,100 rushing yards for Nebraska in 2001. Um, but looking at Zac Larrier's stats this year so far, he has 497 yards and 4 touchdowns with I think with 4 games left to play. Actually they're not 8-0, they're 7-0. With 5 games left to play, I think that 1,000 yards is reachable. He just needs 503 yards in five, presumably 6 games with the Mountain West title game to eclipse that mark. But I want to direct you surprisingly to his passing stats. This year, Zac Larrier is 24 for 33, 619 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And yes, I know it's not the Joe Burrow 2019 season or Bailey Zappi in 2021, but the efficiency that we're seeing from him this season from a passing perspective is so special. Averaging almost 20 yards per completion, throwing a touchdown pass every 6 passes. His quarterback efficiency is 280.3, Jackson. I want to ask you, Jackson, how many Heisman winners have had a higher quarterback passing efficiency rating ever in the over 80-year history of the award?
Yeah, over 80-year history of the award, but a lot of it went to non-quarterbacks back in the day. That is a very
280
hard number
passing,
to
yeah.
beat.
280 rating.
I'm gonna say two.
None. No,
None.
as it stands, I know it's just 33 passes, but Larry's 280 passer efficiency rating is the highest of all time in college football history. Of course, he
I
doesn't
would be
qualify.
curious to know if there's any way to find what is the fewest number of passing attempts of a quarterback that won the Heisman. Any way to look that up?
Um,
It's not
Yeah,
33. I
I
wonder
think
what
I
it
know it off the
is.
top of my head, Jackson. I think it's Angelo Bertelli, which we mentioned, I think, on the podcast a few weeks ago for Notre Dame back in 1943 when he got drafted to the Marines. Angelo Bertelli won the Heisman despite playing only 6 games. And I'm looking up his stats right now. They're incomplete, but he it says right here 30 he went 25 for 36 with 10 touchdowns and 512 yards. Angelo Bertelli in 1943. Of course, it's a different time, right?
Man, this
But
man's
yeah,
a
little
walking
nugget
football
there.
encyclopedia. Wow.
Also, who would have thought that this college football season we would mention Angelo Bertelli twice in this this year? Like that's just crazy to me. Like
If
I
you add that to the hardware bingo card,
Angelo Bertelli
yeah,
reference.
yeah, Angelo Patelli
But
references. Wow.
my thing is, yeah, like looking back, if you compare Larry's stats to other Air Force comparable Air Force quarterbacks who have gotten Heisman votes, look at D Dallas in 1981. He had 1,286 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns, and passing the ball, he had 1,285 passing yards and 7 touchdowns. And then Bo Morgan was 10th for Air Force in the 1996 voting, 1,494 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns, as well as 8 passing touchdowns and 1,200 yards. So his stats are a little bit bleaker, but you look at the situations of those teams. Air Force in '89 wasn't a contender for a New Year's Bowl. In 1996, Air Force wasn't a contender for a New Year's Bowl. In fact, 1996, Air Force went that year. They went. I know they didn't make a bowl that year. Um, in 1996, 1 second, Jackson. In 1996, Air Force went 6-5, and somehow their quarterback Bo Morgan was 10th in the Heisman. So makes me think that if Air Force is able to go 13-0, that Larrier could get some votes, and that brings me back to Keenan Reynolds in 2015, who finished fifth, but definitely should have been in New York. Some years New York, like they invite 6 people to New York, but I don't know why they didn't invite the fifth finisher. But all that being said, what are your thoughts on, I guess, the case for Zac Larrier that I've, presented to you as the honorable Omar Rashawn Borja?
I like the honorable Omar Rashawn Borja. Um, I think that the path is there. It's almost in a very strange way good that conversation is not taking place commonly yet. Because for that to really happen, you need the conversation to heat up in November, preferably mid to late November. So Air Force's season is not necessarily all in front of them, but the hype around them is as other group of 5 teams start cannibalizing them each other, whatever you need to happen, quite frankly, to take place for Air Force to be the clear front runner New Year Six group of 5 team, right? And if Air Force can be that clear front runner for the New Year's Six Group of 5 representation, then the path is there for the mainstream media in sports to talk more about him. And absolutely, I can see the path, but it's good it hasn't taken place. Yes, you don't want to peak in October in your Heisman campaign, but it definitely can take place.
Yeah, so I mean I agree. Like I mean I don't think it'll heat up, and I don't think he'll even get many votes. I feel like he'll bottom out. Like his ceiling is 10th in the Heisman voting. But you look at Keenan Reynolds, like Keenan Reynolds' Heisman run in 20 or I guess run to run to so, excuse me, run to finishing fifth in the Heisman voting in 2015 was fueled by narrative. And just storytelling, just great storytelling, because this is the guy that was pursuing the all-time touchdown record in college football, ended up getting it. And honestly, like, yeah, I guess it was his best year. I was gonna say like it didn't seem like his best year, but against better competition, like against Notre Dame, like Keenan Reynolds did not have a great game. I think Navy got beat like 42-24 in that game. And then against Houston, Greg Ward and Houston ended up getting that Peach Bowl bid that year. Like he didn't have a great game in that one either. So even despite that, he got fifth in the Heisman because of the great storytelling. So I can imagine the same thing with Zac Larrier. And also too, I think Zac Larrier already had his Heisman moment. The 94-yard touchdown pass against Navy early on in the first quarter that really set the tone for that game. Like I think that's probably like one of the best Heisman moments of any candidate we're talking about right now. Plus, like some of his passing lines too were good. Like are just amazing. Like 6 for 7, 189 yards against San Diego State and 101 rushing yards on 8 carries. He's just so efficient. Like the workload's not there. He's just so efficient. And then 4 or 5 for 141 yards or 151 yards against Navy. So let's close the book on Larry there. But I just want to say,
I do want to point out, and this is something I'm always fascinated by, is multi-sport athletes playing. He won. Don't forget, Larrier won the Mountain West Indoor Championship in the 200 meters back in
oh really?
2021.
I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. So
I didn't
like
know
he's
that.
fast. Like don't forget that. So
So yeah, I guess we can go through our games of the week now. But yeah, just know that the Zac Larrier for Heisman campaign. Hopefully, I think we're the podcast to kick it off. I'm excited to see where this goes because I'm all for it. Even though I'm an Army fan, it's great for military football. It really is because the academies are all in this together. But going on to my games of the week, I'm gonna go with a 2-for-1 deal for Thursday night games. The Thursday night slate is pretty spicy on ESPN and CBS Sports Network. I'm gonna start off with a little bit of neck at night action with the Northeast Conference, the NEC at night. The first game, Cole Doyle showed out. I mean, I'll be telling my kids about the Cole Doyle game on Thursday Night Football for St. Francis against Wagner. This week we have LIU versus Central Connecticut State. Both programs have struggled this year. LIU is 1-6, but they did perform strongly against Baylor. I know in that game they only trailed Baylor by 9 points at halftime, which is something that is almost unthinkable for an NEC team to trail only 9 points at halftime against a Big 12 school. And they have a strong defense. I mean, they've been very competitive throughout this year. They competed well against Maine, a CAA school, losing only 24-13. But for LIU, you're going to see one of the best defensive players in the country in Eric O'Neill, a guy that definitely should get a lot of Walter Payton votes, or not Walter Payton, sorry, Buck Buchanan Award votes. He has 15.5 TFLs so far this year, and he'll be tasked with trying to stop Elijah Howard, who at this point is one of the hottest running backs in the country. He has 552 yards this year on the ground, 6 yards a carry. But he had a 2-game run in late September and early October where he ran for 16 carries for 146 yards against Brown and 23 carries for 257 yards against Delaware State. And honestly, one of the best games of the year. That was a 51-44 shootout out there in I think they're in New Britain, Connecticut, for Central Connecticut State. So CBS Sports Network, 7 o'clock Eastern, be there for Neck at Night, and also have a screen at the same time at the very same time on for South Carolina State versus North Carolina Central, where our guy Davius Richard. So I really thought that him having 2 Thursday night games in a row would put him at an advantage in the Walter Payton race, because we're not talking much about the Walter Payton race, but this is a good time to talk about it with Davius Richard. Of course, he's missed 1.5 games, missed the Mississippi Valley State game and exited the UCLA game early. But this year, he's just been a force to be reckoned with. 949 passing yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground too, 377 rush yards, and 10 touchdowns. I know you compared him to Cam Newton. He can really, against South Carolina State, a program that has a reputation for playing strong defense. Think about Shaq Leonard, Jacoby Durant, and also Javon Hargrove under Buddy Pugh in his last year now at South Carolina State. He has a chance to just really reinvigorate the talk for the Walter Payton Award against South Carolina State, a team that has a strong pass rush with 3 players with over 5.5 tackles for loss. So do not even think about subscribing to Amazon Prime. Do not even turn on your laptop or turn on your Roku TVs or smart TVs to Amazon Prime. Just watch South Carolina State and North Carolina Central and LIU in Central Connecticut State, and you will be just fine. That's what I'm doing. I've not watched a single Thursday night football game this year, to be
As a
honest with you.
Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan and as a Al Michaels fan and Kirk Herbstreit fan,
Al Michaels is kind of washed, Jackson. Let's both face it.
I will not be participating in that. I'll have one screen on the Prime Vision cast and one screen on one of the alternate broadcasts that Prime Video does offer. So because I'm all in on Tampa Bay football, can't really focus on anything else. Although if you are not a Tampa Bay fan, these are 2 great alternatives that you should tune in.
Even if you are a Buccaneers fan.
If only to see Chris Howe's throwing motion for Long Island, for the Long
Oh
Island
my
Sharks.
gosh.
Yeah. So
I was trying to avoid that.
Chris Howe's throwing motion, you should tune in to the CBS Sports Network to watch that one. So
I was trying to avoid the talk about his throwing motion because
I had to.
They deserve to be more than memes. Like, players deserve to be like the players on both these teams. Like, this is a rare opportunity for national exposure. I just think they should be seen as more than just gimmicks. Like, yeah, Chris House is funny throwing motion, but Eric O'Neill is one of the best defensive players in the country, bar none. Like, let's talk about that instead.
If
you know
he
what
had
I mean?
if he had more all-purpose touchdowns than interceptions, I wouldn't just mention that. But
Ouch. Okay. Wow.
no, I'm playing. He's a freshman. His first career start was on the road against a tough Baylor team. That's not a knock on Chris Howell at all. Chris Howell been adequate as a quarterback there and got thrown into a rough situation. So that is not meant to be shade. Not a hater. I just want to specify. I'm just saying.
It's easy to score. It's easy to be competitive against Baylor.
Wow,
what can you say?
That's low.
I'm playing. I knew I'd get a reaction.
That's low. I'm gonna go with my game of the week to watch. I'm gonna go with UNLV Fresno State. Really, the winner has an inside track to play against Air Force in the Mountain West Conference Championship against the Air Force Academy. So excited for that one. Um, I will say Fresno State, man, they have really like outplayed all of the expectations that I had, quite
Yes.
frankly. For once they lost Jake Hayner, I didn't think it would be good, but man, they have found a way, and credit to them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so I saw UNLV play when they came down to El Paso. My dad came down and visited, and I love UNLV's scheme because they have done things that I've just not seen running the ball. They run a shotgun scheme. It's not really a shotgun option, but they'll do things where both running backs are on one side of the quarterback in the shotgun, which like that's just a thing I've never seen. They'll run a triple option out of it, and they run it very well. I mean, and talk about a team that's overcome adversity. I know Doug Brumfield was, the starting quarterback at the beginning of the year. Like we were high on Doug Brumfield, even last year. I remember us having a podcast saying like, if Doug Brumfield plays well against Notre Dame, like Doug Brumfield's going to be in the Heisman race, right? But this year, like, they have responded well after an injury to Doug Brumfield to Jaden Mayava. Mayava runs the ball pretty well at quarterback from what I saw. And this is the team, like you say, an inside track. Like in an insane situation, like we could look at a team, a UNLV team, because UNLV has Air Force, right? They play Air Force. If UNLV beats Air Force, could UNLV be the front runner for the New Year's Six? They beat Vanderbilt. They have more Power Five wins than Tulane, and they have a win over Air Force. And they also play Wyoming. They got Wyoming at home. They don't have to play in the altitude. They play them at Allegiant Stadium. So this is definitely like honestly, who would have thought that Fresno State UNLV would have had New Year's Six implications? So that's what I'm excited for. I mean, I don't think people realize I guess how good UNLV is this year.
No, genuinely, UNLV is had a sneaky good season, and they have the chance to upset Fresno State team that was on the radar coming into the year. If only for their performance last year, despite the loss of talent, but they have a chance to really ruin that. So my next game of the week to watch, I'm going to go with Holy Cross at Fordham. I bet we could both talk about this one for a while. Man, what a thriller last year. Man, a 53-52 Holy Cross win. Holy Cross coming out of a really disappointing loss. I know you had Lafayette ranked, so I'll give you credit there, but a lot of people did not expect that loss coming. Fordham, on the other hand, coming off of their bye week, Fordham's has like a really solid receiving room, not necessarily the depth,
Yes.
but some top end talent with MJ Wright, Garrett Cody, Makai Felton, each with 4 or 5 receiving touchdowns and a combined 1,300 yards. So man, that'll be a fun one. I'm excited to see not only who wins this game in the race in the league, but in the conference. But man, I'm excited to see how Holy Cross responds to a loss like that because, like we talked about before the show, they haven't really seen a failure like this in a minute. So
Yeah, I think the Patriot League has a lot of depth this year. I'm really impressed by the depth because Fordham's one loss in the Patriot League is to Georgetown. Georgetown, the perennial cellar dweller of the Patriot League. They played in a 3,000 seat stadium. My first college football or sorry, my second college football game was a Holy Cross Georgetown game. Georgetown has never been good, but they beat Fordham. For Holy Cross, I think the run's over because it like the MEAC, the Patriot League conference season has little room for error because it's a 6 game season and they already need Lafayette to drop a game, and they need Lafayette to drop 2 games out of the remaining, I think, 4 conference games, which I just don't think is going to happen with the rest of the Patriot League. But yeah, Fordham loves to air the ball out. You'll see like a contrast of styles, obviously. I mean, Tim DeMorat still waiting for him to join the National Spring Football League, and yeah, the receiving room is always great. Like last year, they had Fotis Kokoshulis, an amazing receiver, and they almost beat Ohio. Which, speaking of Ohio, I'm going to power through my last 2 games to watch. We got Ohio versus Miami of Ohio. And Ohio really needs this game, honestly, to have the tiebreaker over Miami of Ohio because both teams have one loss in the MAC. And this game, honestly, could be the clincher for the MAC East. I mean, who would have everyone thought that Ohio would be the best team in the MAC East, but it just really hasn't looked that way. But Miami of Ohio has looked great on multiple occasions. Last week against Toledo, though, the conference looks like Toledo's to lose at this point. Lost 21-17 to Toledo, but your boy Jackson, Brett Gabbert is having a solid year at quarterback. 14 touchdowns, 5 picks, and then 2 rushing touchdowns on the ground. Just a great game, honestly, for the MAC. Both teams are 6-2, I think. 6-2 or 5-2. I gotta check. 5-2, I think. Yeah, both teams are 6-2. So both teams will be in prime position for Motown. And then going on to my last game of the year or last game of the week, we got Mercer versus Western Carolina. And I'll admit it, I wrote off the Mercer Bears time and time again earlier this year. But they have a legitimate chance at an at-large spot with the win against Western Carolina. Western Carolina, who's ranked in my top five in the SCS poll and pretty highly ranked. I mean, if they beat Western Carolina right now, I mean, you're looking at a team that could enter the postseason with a 8-3 record and with only losses to two ranked SoCon teams and a loss to Ole Miss. They have great receiver talent. Ty James on defense. Solomon Zubaru has 9 TFLs. Western Carolina is arguably the best running back in FCS with Desmond Reed, 872 yards and 12 touchdowns, 7.5 yards per carry. For Western Carolina, this game's particularly important for seeding purposes. And I'll briefly review the FCS seeding procedures where the top eight seeded teams in the country get a bye week and get to host a second round game, which is huge. And they get home field advantage against, teams that aren't seeds throughout the playoffs and lower seeded teams. So getting a seed for Western Carolina is huge, and this game is important for it. But I feel like since the pandemic season, we've been wanting Mercer to make the playoffs. And they just been disappointing us. So if they beat Western Carolina, they have an easy road the rest of the way to go 8-3 and get their first ever playoff appearance. So those are my games of the week to watch.
I have my last game of the week to watch. I am going to go with the Power Five in this one. Oregon State at Arizona. Believe it or not, it's their first matchup since 2019. Something that I want to speak to is Oregon State's efficiency. They're a top 15 scoring offense, despite being 40th or worse in every other major offensive statistical category. We've seen Arizona be really competitive and almost win games that they necessarily shouldn't, i.e. USC. And Arizona, I'll say Oregon State's defense, it's probably the best that Arizona's probably the best defense Arizona is going to face all year, but they haven't seen receivers like Cowling and McMillan. That's a duo that Oregon State is going to have to scheme for sure. So not as much of a meaningful race in their respective conference as some of these others that we've mentioned, but did want to obviously mention that. So two of my games are 10:30 Eastern kickoff games and on the East Coast here. So I'm excited for that. Yeah, man. But that's it for me. You got anything else, brother, before we hop off?
No, I don't have anything else because looking at the chat, looks like you got some food,
Oh
got a
yeah,
nice
food's
dinner
here,
date
man.
waiting for you.
Food's here, man.
Food's here,
So
dinner date's waiting for you, and looking at your body language, you got to go soon. But I just gotta say, watch out for Zac Larrier for Heisman. I mean, and just keep watching college football. We got some Ivy League Friday night as well. Brown versus Penn. Forgot to mention. I got to mention Ivy League Friday night. I'm sorry. Brown is way
the
more competitive
tradition
this
is
year.
back, an American tradition like no other. So I am
Exactly.
actually going to watch. I am actually going to watch. So
Yeah, I mean, Harvard Cornell drew 153,000 viewers on ESPN2. Like that is
that's
amazing
one of
numbers
them.
for any.
Hey,
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, Penn is having a great year. They look like the front runner in the Ivy League after Harvard lost to a really, I wouldn't say a really bad, but a uncharacteristically bad Princeton team. So against Brown, the country will get to see the Ivy League front runners, and this is a team that looks like they can go 9-1 this year. I don't see anything stopping Penn from going 9-1. Player to watch for the Penn Quakers is Aiden Sayin, who has 1,781 yards and 11 touchdowns. And of course, if you're an NFL fan, you know that Penn has great receiving talent. Justin Watson on the Chiefs, probably the most well-known player in that receiver and tight end core among Taylor Swift fans on that team. A Penn graduate, Justin Watson, my favorite receiver on the Chiefs. This year they got Jared Richardson, who has 500 receiving yards in 6 games. So with that, I got to show some love to Brown too. Actually, Jackson, one
and a
thing.
brief reminder that the regular season is everything in the Ivy League. There is no postseason, so you really got to win it all where it matters.
Yeah, this is going to be a great game for the air attack. West Rocket has 586 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns for the Brown Bears with Jake Wilcox, a great quarterback following in EJ Perry, electric EJ Perry's footsteps. Michigan Panthers, great. So that's all I got to say. Didn't forget about Ivy League Friday night, and I'll be planning my Friday date night around that. But until next time, everyone, peace, love, and soul.